What is the scariest glitch in the Matrix you have experienced? My grandmother passed when I was young, maybe 8. When I was around 16 I had a dream that I was hanging out with her and talking and catching up. She stood up in the dream to leave and I begged her not to and asked when I could see her again. She said nothing, but pointed to a calendar that had a date circle. I remembered the date when I woke up. It was several months in the future and told my mom about my dream, as she was always interested in that kind of stuff. Several months go by and the date and the dream is approaching within the next few days. My cousin's husband gets killed in a freak car accident, and my parents fly across the country to be with family. They are to be gone over the date in the dream, and my mom, being superstitious about the dream, makes me promise not to leave the house that day. I agree, no big deal. My parents were going to be gone. What did I need to leave for? The day in the dream arrives and my friend calls me up to ride into the city with him. I say no thanks. Late that night, I get a call from him that he was in a bad car accident and his car's totaled. Passenger side all smashed to heck. Had I been with him? On the other hand, if he went to pick you up first, the accident might not have happened. I had just finished my last class of the day at university, and I went to grab a sandwich from a sandwich shop. While in line I had a strange feeling, and basically a voice in my head saying, "Buy a second sandwich." I had this odd feeling I was going to need this second sandwich. I felt really weird about it, but for some reason I decided to buy a second sandwich. So I ate one of the 2 sandwiches I had purchased, and then exited the building. It was a sandwich shop inside of a large building of classrooms on campus. To walk to my car, as I'm walking along the street to the parking garage, I have to pass a bus stop. At the bus stop there is just this one guy hanging out there. He's most likely one of the homeless poor people that are often around school. It wasn't that unusual really. As I'm walking by, the guy looks me straight in the eyes and asks, "Hey, is there any way I could have that sandwich?" I was a little stunned, but at the same time I felt like I had been prepared for the situation somehow. I almost immediately handed the sandwich to the guy and said, "Yeah, it's all yours." The guy was extremely thankful. I then just walked to my car. I guess it's just a law of large numbers kind of thing, but it was a very odd experience. If I had had any other reason for buying 2 sandwiches, I would probably have just chalked it up to random chance gluttony, feeling generous, etc. But I distinctly recall the weird, uncomfortable feeling of kind of being told to purchase a second sandwich for some unknown reason. I was seriously contemplating just throwing the sandwich away and thinking I was losing my mind from too much stress, a long day at school, and then it was just too perfect. The guy just seemed to be waiting there for me somehow to deliver the sandwich. Maybe he was meditating on getting a sandwich, and we're all sort of connected to some kind of universal thought network and his thoughts happen to affect mine. I guess that's my only semi-functional theory. Anyway, kind of a cool story in some ways. Or he was just behind you in the line and whispered it in your ear without you noticing him. Or alternatively, telepathic hobo with a penchant for sandwiches. Me and my cousins went night fishing on the coast once. During the night all the fish get more active and supposedly come closer to the surface because there aren't birds snatching them up, so it's ideal for casting a rod into the waves. Anyway, I had been on the rods from 6-8 PM and was cold and tired, so I switched over with a cousin and tucked myself into the blanket and beach chair thing that we brought. It was getting to be dusk now and I looked out along the beach, and about 300 meters up I see a lump that looks to be moving its way up from the ocean and along the beach. I pointed out to my cousins who also notice it, but it's dark now and very cold so we couldn't really be bothered investigating. I keep looking back at it every 10 or so minutes because it's the only thing that is interesting when you're waiting for a fish to hook itself. And sure enough it is further up the beach each time, slowly crawling. I can see small limbs fluttering and trying to shift its large body forward, and so I assume this is a sea turtle heading into shore to lay eggs. I'm interested in seeing this a little closer and so I walk off towards it with a torch. As I get closer it stops shuffling about but I can make out its form a lot better. Its dome back and flat limbs that are semi-obscured by sand. As I get to 50 meters I am struck by confusion. It's no longer resembling a sea turtle, but turns out to be a piece of driftwood. What the frick, I say aloud. I had watched this thing crawl its way up the beach and distinctly remember seeing sand flick up around it as it crawled. I walked back to our fishing spot and looked back, and sure enough it has crawled up into the tree line. Anyway, I had been on the rods. Don't do rods, kids. This isn't about me, it happened to my sister. My mother's grandma died before my sister was born, so she never had the chance to meet her, which was a shame. She was such a lovely soul. One day my sister was playing in the backyard in the sand pit. My parents were just on the porch with our grandparents drinking coffee. My mum glances over to my sister, 3 years old when this happened, and she sees her looking at nothing and talking, almost as if she was having a conversation with somebody. My mum wasn't fazed. It's somewhat normal for young kids to have imaginary friends or exhibit left of center behavior, but nonetheless, she thought she'd just walk over to see what was going on. She sits in the sand pit next to her and asks her who she's talking to. My sister replies with, "I'm talking to Nana." That's a bit strange because Nana is still on the porch drinking her coffee, but okay, she'll entertain my sister. "What do you mean? Nana is sitting over there." My sister, still not really looking at my mum, just replies with, "Your Nana." At this point, my mum is just simply WTFing all the way into the house. As soon as she heard this, she grabbed a photo album, took a photo of her nan in her favorite dress and walked back to my sister. She asked me sister to tell her what Nana looked like and what she was wearing. Described it to the dot. My sister was never shown these photos. I, who was alive and had met her, couldn't have described her to even half the accuracy. Just nope. My mum told me this recently when we were discussing random topics. The look on her face was actually slightly worrying because to this day she still has absolutely no idea how this is even possible. At work on my phone, please excuse errors, etc. Once in college in California, it was $pint night, so we had a bunch just sitting on our table. We had some extras as we were leaving and another group was sitting down, so we gave the beers to them. They thanked us and we did a little small talk, and with one of them I had one of those "Where are you from?" "Washington State." "Me too." "What city?" "Me too." "What high school?" "Me too." "What year?" Turned out he was a few years older, but I was friends with his little brother Matt. 2 years later, Matt, still living in WA, was in Vegas with his buddies eating tacos, and had a similar situation where they gave extra tacos to some people and a person in their group had something in common with the person they gave them to. So, as Matt and his friends were leaving, that story obviously reminded him of the story his brother told him about running into me in California. So he started telling the story to his buddies that also went to high school with us. As they walked, during the story, I ran into him walking the other direction. I was visiting from CA. He couldn't even speak. When I was maybe about 10, I was watching a TV show in my room while my older sisters watched the same show in the lounge. They were being mean and wouldn't let me watch in the same room as them. I think the show I was watching was a creepy episode of Ripley's Believe It or Not, or some similar show. Being young, the stories really creeped me out. Anyway, halfway through the show it starts fast forwarding, except I wasn't watching it from a video, it was playing in real time. The fast forwarding went on for well over a minute until I decided to run down to ask my sisters what was happening. When I got to the lounge I noticed the same show was running perfectly, no fast forwarding. I ran back to my room and it was still fast forwarding. I was confused and freaked out and I think I just changed the channel. My family just laughed at me when I told them, but it still confuses me. I assumed the show was trying to frick with people by purposely making it seem like it was fast forwarding, but it was only on my TV and it went on for so long. TLDR, watching TV show in real time, it begins fast forwarding. I check on another TV but the show is fine. My TV was just spooky. Something similar happens all the time with one freaking channel here. Everything will be fine. Then Law and Order comes on, the original, and the show is running at like 1.2x speed. A little background. This is one of my earliest memories, so I was probably between ages 2 and 3, and I lived in a ranch-style home in a nice neighborhood. The only people at home were me and my mom. My sister was at school and my dad was working. It's a nice day out, probably right around noon. It's hot, so we've got the front door open with the screen door locked. I'm sitting on the couch in the living room, which is only 2 or 3 feet from the door, playing with a toy cash register. Scene set. I look up from my toy and see a man standing behind the screen door. I don't remember him walking up the driveway, just him suddenly being there. He's wearing a police outfit. I'm confused, and he just kind of smiles at me. I should mention that I wasn't scared at all. There was a policeman at the screen door and in my young mind there was nothing off about that. So I called to my mom that there was a man at the door. My mom was in the kitchen, which was attached to the living room, so it didn't take long for her to come to me. She walked into the room and immediately I could tell something was very, very wrong. She paused once she saw the man, and then power walked straight for me, picked me up, and ran into the hallway where we couldn't be seen from the door. I remember being held close to her chest and being extremely confused. She looked extremely frightened. We stayed there for a while, and eventually when we came back out, the man was gone. The memory ends there. Nearly 2 decades later I still don't have a clue what happened that day. A few years ago I brought it up with my mom, but she kind of just brushed off the question and I didn't push it. Now I'm just afraid to ask. I still think about it from time to time and I think it's insane how well I remember that moment. The texture of the couch, the toy, the policeman, his smile, my mother's face. I don't remember anything else in my life that well. The moment was just so tense that I don't think I'll ever forget it. Once, in primary school, I was standing next to the flagpole in the main field. I don't recall what I was doing, but I was surrounded by children running around and playing. I looked up, and suddenly, I felt as though an enormous quantity of water had been dropped on my head, like a swimming pool's worth. I could feel the cold water running over me, turbulent, as though I were in a stormy ocean swell. I remember panicking and flailing about, gasping for breath. Then it ended, just as suddenly as it had begun. I looked about, and all the children were running around and playing like before, as though nothing had happened at all. No one even glanced in my direction. I ran my hands over my clothes, but they were completely dry. I looked up, and saw a lone seagull perched on the flagpole. It spread its wings and flew away lazily. I was very confused of course, and I assumed that the seagull had defecated on me, even though I couldn't find anything on my clothes or hair, and knowing that a seagull couldn't possibly make that much, I just went with that explanation. I was a 3rd grader, and I had far more important things to think about obviously, but I've kept it at the back of my mind all these years, and only realized later how freaky it actually was. TLDR. Had the sudden, vivid experience of drowning when standing on a crowded school field. Flailed around like mad, but no one seemed to notice a thing. Not my experience, but my mother's, and I was with her at that time. My mother went to the doctor and she needed to do some breathing tests for her lungs. She never smoked in her life. I went with her. She needed to breathe very hard through a small tube with a clip on her nose, in different ways for like 1 hour. She told me it really hurt and she went dizzy. After the first few minutes she started to cry because it felt like the scariest thing she had ever done. She said it needed to be done, so we continued when she had mained up a little bit. Something like after 45 minutes, when she just did the so-called hard punch breath, it was like she died instantly. Her skin turned pale, empty eyes, no breath, no movements, and didn't react to anything we said when we said something or touched her for like 1 minute. It felt more like 3 minutes, but I think it was something like 1 minute. Suddenly she came back to life. Normal skin color, bright eyes, but very confused. We paused for like 5 minutes and continued to finish the last few easier tests. After that she told she was seeing me, the doctor, and herself from above her body for a few seconds. Then she looked up and she saw her mother, my grandmother, who was already dead for plus 20 years. My grandmother pushed her down back into her body and disappeared. She didn't connect with her body directly for a few seconds. She said she was moving but her body didn't, and she didn't felt anything. Then she connected again. When I was at high school I was about 13 or 14. A new kid started who was from South Africa. He became friends with me and my friends, and we remained so until we left school age 16. Over the course of the next 2 or 3 years of our friendship group, some of us went on to stay at school, others went on to start jobs, etc. My South African friend went on to join the police force as a community support officer. This is a British police role. He was even in one of those police reality shows for a very brief moment. Not long into his job he was sacked. I won't go into details, but it was a stupid thing to have done. Anyway, I had seen him on the beat on a couple of occasions before his sacking, but by this point I'd moved out the area and lost regular contact with the majority of that friendship circle. Not long after his sacking he moved back to South Africa. A year or so passes and I hear through Facebook that my South African friend had passed away in a motorcycle accident. I do some googling and sure enough this is true, and I even find a YouTube video of photos from his funeral. Fast forward a couple of years later, I was walking through my town heading towards my office. I glance up and I swear I catch sight of my South African friend in full police uniform going the opposite way about 6 foot to my left. I stop and just follow him with my eyes until he walks around the corner. I don't think this was a ghost. I'd like to think this was from a parallel universe where he didn't frick up his career and get sacked, but instead became a full police officer and remained in the UK, and ultimately not die in a traffic accident. Sorry if that's a bit of a long story, just to say I saw a dead friend walk past me in the street. 10 years ago I was returning home from a road trip with 2 friends. I received a phone call from my parents asking when we would be arriving, and I explained that we were about 25 minutes away. About a minute later we came around a bend. It was a full moon and we could see the reflection from a lake below us, and other than that the road was completely empty. Suddenly everything went completely dark in the car, no lights from the dash or gauges or headlights on the road. The music also stopped and restarted at the beginning of the CD we were listening to. There was now a vehicle pulled over by the police about 1/4 mile in front of us that hadn't been there a split second before. I assumed I had dozed off for just a second as it was late. I thought it was still quite peculiar, though. After about a minute, the driver of the car tuned the music all the way down and said, "Did that just happen to anyone else?" The other passenger in the backseat sat forward abruptly and exclaimed, "I thought I just fell asleep." We then realized that the clock in the car was reading an hour later than it just had a minute before. To keep ourselves from freaking out, we decided that the car had possibly had a momentary electrical failure and reset the clock to an odd time, turned off the dash lights, headlights, and gauges, and restarted the CD player. But when we arrived home 25 minutes later, we were 1 hour late. I am missing an hour of my life, and to this day have no idea how it happened. When I was 18, my best friend called me very late one night at 1:43 am. He left me a voicemail to call him back. I wasn't near my phone when he called. I called him back at 1:46 am but got his voicemail this time. He sounded distressed, like something was really wrong. I was concerned but went to bed anyway. The next morning I was at work and sitting in the middle of a staff meeting when I felt like I was about to throw up. I went to the bathroom and started heaving my guts out. I just assumed I'd ate something bad the previous night. I was doing outside sales at the time, so I left to go to my next appointment. I was driving along until my phone rang. It was my best friend's girlfriend and she was crying uncontrollably. I couldn't understand her until finally I heard it. "John's dead." My best friend had been in a car accident the previous night and hit a semi-truck head-on while he was driving home. There are 2 things that to this day make it hard to sleep every time I think about it. The first is that the paramedics pronounced him dead at 1:43 am, the exact time of the missed call. The accident had to have happened at least 10 to 15 minutes prior. The other thing that was probably just a coincidence, but getting sick at my meeting. Me and a buddy were taking a stroll at night on a beach in Florida, Lido Key Beach if it makes a difference, after a big dinner. It was midwinter and the wind was really whipping, had to be in the low 30s with the wind chill. Because of this, the beach was deserted, no one. Moon is out and lighting up the place so well everything is casting shadows. So we're talking and whatnot, when we notice there is a guy walking parallel to us, but right near the surf. So we're near the sidewalk because no one in their right mind walks near the surf in winter. The water is freezing. I point him out to my bud Jim. Nothing really that odd yet, but this guy is keeping perfect pace with us. He's wearing a hoodie, so we can't see a face. Hands are buried in his pockets. We speed up a little. He speeds up at the exact same time. We slow down. He does too. Okay, whatever. My friend and I are both large guys and this is one dude. Jim tells me this guy might be looking for trouble, so be on your toes. I should mention that this being Florida, the beach is flat, not even sand dunes. No place to hide. Everything is flat and wide open. It's just us and the mystery dude for as far as we can see. This guy is throwing off some pretty aggressive vibes. He's been following us for 15 minutes and has now started staring right at us while walking, not even looking where he is going. I turn my head to my buddy and tell him this guy is nothing but trouble. I turn back. He's gone. There is no place this guy could have disappeared to in the 4 seconds I turned my head. No dunes, no lifeguard towers, nothing. It was hundreds of feet to the sidewalk where we were. Only place to go would have been the water, and that was a death sentence considering how cold it was. Me and Jim just stand there in stunned silence looking in every direction in the bright moonlight for the person who we had been watching follow us for the past 20 minutes. Time traveler who couldn't access his wormhole with you guys watching. So he starts glaring at you too so you might frick off and he can get home to 2114. And when you look away, VWOOP he left. I grew up near an abandoned house. It was along a road that was often traveled by me and a few friends. In all the times I saw it, there was never a spark of life in the house. The windows were always dark, the door always closed, and barred up. So one night me and some friends had really nothing to do. We decided, well me and the driver decided, the other two really didn't want to come along, to go to the abandoned house and check it out. We drove by it and were immediately caught off guard. The drapes were open, the lights were on and the ceiling fan was turning ever so slowly in the living room. We could not believe that someone lived in that house. A unanimous decision was made to nope the frick out. Fast forward 2 weeks later, we are walking along the street and stopped in front of the house. It was dead as ever, not a single light was on. A neighbor saw us talking about it and just causally walked by saying, "That house has been there since I moved in 17 years ago. They should tear it down, no one lives in it." We proceeded to tell him that we saw the lights on a couple of weeks ago. He laughed telling us the house had no power for the last 12 years. About 5 years ago, I was at a Mexican restaurant with my now ex-fiancée having lunch. We are sitting and munching chips and salsa waiting for our meals to arrive, when another group comes and sits down near us. I'm talking and laughing with her and just kinda looking around the room, people watching, and then I freeze. This guy who just sat down at the table near us is staring at me, hardcore. He looks so much like me that I myself would have gotten as confused if I was in a hurry. Same hair color style, same beard facial hairstyle, same sort of complexion skin tone, eerily similar facial features. It was like suddenly cresting the hill of some dramatic roller coaster and now your stomach has wormed its way into your throat and bedded down. We just stared at each other for several moments, and I knew he had the same feeling of who the frick is that? He looks just like me. We finally broke eye contact and never spoke or acknowledged each other again, although I would catch him looking back at me out of the corner of my eye from time to time, and I certainly kept stealing glances at him. It was just so uncanny. What makes me remember this now other than seeing this question here? I'm pretty sure she saw him again yesterday, and texted me last night asking why I didn't acknowledge her when she waved. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.